have this mind in you. Notice the word mind. Have this mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who, and then it goes on to the hymn, right? The song. Notice how this passage starts in what you have as chapter 2, verse 1 and following. Notice that Paul begins this section with, if then there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete, right? So what do you think Paul's answer is to whether there is encouragement in Christ, consolation from love, sharing in the Spirit, compassion and sympathy? It's more like, since there's a lot of encouragement and so on, it's like the sort of if that is sure of itself, right? So Paul's saying there's a lot of this stuff, so fill my joy up. And this is how you fill my joy up, Paul said. Be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. And then Paul says, have this mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus. You see the use of the word mind? Because if we didn't have the lead into the hymn and the hymn, we might think that what Paul wants them all to do is just agree on everything, right? Have the same mind, be of one accord and one mind. It sounds like Paul wants just everybody to say the same words in the same way and agree with everybody on everything. But when he says, have this mind that in you that was also in Christ Jesus, we know that it's not exactly a content that he wants, it's a way of thinking, right? In fact, the Greek verb in verse 5 is really could be translated, think the way Jesus thought. Phronete, right? Think the way Jesus thought. And that comes in after these two mentions of mind and makes it look like what Paul is doing by introducing the Jesus song is illustrating what he's just asked them to do to complete his joy. Be of the same mind, have the same love. So he's looking for unity of a kind. He's looking for accord. He's looking for community. But the key comes out in the next sentence. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look out not to your own interest, but to the interest of others, right? And so how do these two things fit together? Well, the very next line is going to say, think like Jesus thinks, and then lay out this song. So if I'm a Philippian, I'm saying, that's a pretty good visual aid, Paul, right? Some of you have used visual aids in your teaching or in some way to get a point across. What's Paul's visual aid? Jesus, right? Paul's visual aid is, you know what? Think like Jesus. Here's what he had. He had divine propriety. He was equal with God. He very well could have said, pretty nice up here, I'm not going down, right? But he didn't exploit what he had. He looked out for the interest of others, right? He looked out for the interest of others, not his own interest. He considered others as more important than himself in a way, right? So Paul is using the hymn, using Jesus himself to illustrate what the attitude and way of mind, NIV says mindset, have this mindset in you that is also in Christ Jesus, right? And he's using this song to communicate what the mindset looks like. Do you see how that goes? He wants the Philippians to have community, and he knows the only way to really get that done is to give yourself up for one another. Now, I bet many of you have heard a whole lot of wedding sermons, and I bet I can guess which one in the wedding homily is the most common passage in the wedding business, right? what passage do most preachers use? 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, right? Paul didn't give that to couples. He gave it to the Corinthian community because they couldn't figure out how to recognize spiritual gifts. In Paul's moment when he talks about couples, he says, I wish you all could be like me and not marry. But if you have to marry, it's better to marry than to burn with lust. How many of you have heard a wedding sermon from that passage? It doesn't go over well. It's not exactly romantic, right? So wedding people use 1 Corinthians 13, but people who want to preach a wedding sermon on the same kind of themes, but don't want to be cliche and use 1 Corinthians 13, have a home in Philippians 2, right? What makes a good marriage? Well, I heard Tony Campolo once, way back when I was in college. Tony Campolo, the great Christian speaker, spoke on Philippians in my company, and he said, this one ought to be a wedding thing. And I took him up on it because I used this in weddings I've done all my life. This ought to be used in weddings because picture it. You got this young couple and they're just all excited about being married. And so the wedding comes and then they have their first fight. And the fight is, honey, I'm sorry. I need you to be able to go and pursue your dream. So I'm going to take the job and you go to graduate school. And the partner says, I'm sorry, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to take the job and you're going to go to graduate school. And then they have their first fight trying to give the other one what they want. He said, that would be a marriage I could bet on lasting, right? Paul thinks that about a community in Philippi. This community can go on and not splinter in the way we talked about last week, not splinter if they give themselves up for one another, if they take on, again, the mindset of Christ.